Ross Feingold on the Taiwan Hashtag program, hosted by the Storm Media Group, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan. Today we'll be talking about the good and the bad news for the declared presidential candidates, and we'll also talk a little bit about the good and the bad news for the undeclared presidential candidates, of which there are still several, believe it or not, getting this close to the presidential election, which is January 11th, 2020. Mark your calendars. Welcome to come to Taiwan and join us for what should be another exciting election day. The incumbent president, Tsai Ing-wen, has actually had a run of very good news in recent days, and it's reflected in her poll numbers. Several polls from various reputable polling agencies have put her in a growing position of over 35, 37%, with the other candidates falling below 20s, mid-20s. So the lead is definitely increasing for Tsai Ing-wen in recent days. Why is this? Well, her government announced an upward increase in the forecast for 2019 GDP growth. Government recently raised it to 2.46% annual growth forecast for 2019, far ahead of some of the neighboring countries in Asia, which are seeing shrinking growth due to the trade war. The government says that its policies to welcome Taiwan companies to return to Taiwan from China are working. They're now claiming approximately $20 billion in committed investment, and it's reflecting now in the GDP numbers. We'll see how well this translates into voter support going forward, because economic issues, as we'll be talking about in the coming months, are probably going to be just as important in this election as China issues. So economic news so far looking better, although there are some bad news on the economic front as well. The export numbers are falling consistently month to month, and again, that's probably due to the trade war. On the foreign policy front, another big victory for Tsai Ing-wen, with the Trump administration announcing the sale of 66 F-16V fighter jets to Taiwan. Now, this is something that the Taiwan government across several presidents had been requesting all the way back to Chen Shui-bian's presidency between 2000 and 2008. The Bush administration did not approve. The Obama administration also did not approve the same request when it was made by the President Wen-je between 2008 and 2016. Overlaps with the presidencies of the U.S., as you may have noted. But the Trump administration, which has approved several large weapon sales to Taiwan over the past 2.5 years, did approve the F-16 sale with overwhelming bipartisan support in the United States Congress. And of course, that got a lot of media attention, not just here in Taiwan, but in the United States, in Washington, D.C., globally. And not surprisingly, China issued several angry statements voicing their objection. They always object to weapon sales to Taiwan. They've threatened to sanction U.S. companies that are involved in this supply chain, which also have business with Chinese companies or in China. So we'll see how that one plays out. But again, another very positive development for President Tsai. And of course, she does take credit for that. She says that these are the policies of my government. We have the trust of the United States. And that's what prompted the U.S. to approve the weapon sale at this time. Does it mean the U.S. government endorses President Tsai for a second term? Well, of course, the U.S. government will never officially endorse a candidate here in Taiwan. We leave that up to the voters. Another piece of good news on the foreign policy front, the foreign minister of Taiwan, Joseph Wu, attended a Pacific Islands forum where he met with leaders of countries that diplomatically recognize Taiwan. And also the United States Secretary of the Interior was at this meeting and had a one-on-one meeting with Foreign Minister Wu. So again, another positive development on the diplomacy front. High-profile meeting with U.S. cabinet officials. This kind of bilateral meeting used to be rare, so maybe it'll become increasingly common as the Trump administration shows more support for Taiwan. So we see President Tsai and her team trying to sell this domestically. We're doing really well on foreign policy issues. We're getting a lot of support. So another very positive development for President Tsai as far as relations with the U.S. and this vote of confidence, you could say, from U.S. government officials and the government of President Tsai. There was some bad news for President Tsai as well, though. It wasn't all good news in recent days. The fallout from the cigarette smuggling scandal involving her security detail who accompanied her on her most recent overseas trip. Indictments have been coming down for some of the people involved, both within the national security apparatus with the protection team, as well as at the airline who helped facilitate this. So people have been indicted. People are still under investigation. The numbers are relatively large. We have people purchasing illegally or exceeding the duty-free allowance for dozens, even hundreds of cartons of cigarettes. Of course, it was a terrible breakdown. These were political appointees at the top of the structure both in the national security apparatus as well as at China Airlines, which is controlled by the government, of course. And President Tsai has not avoided taking responsibility for this. Again, we've talked about this on previous shows. We see some of the lower level of officials have tried to protect the president. They try to deflect responsibility. But to be fair to the president, she has taken the view that I am ultimately responsible for the people that are political appointees, and she's ordered that people should be disciplined or fired. And of course, the judicial system is taking its course, and that's why we finally see, after several weeks, indictments as well as ongoing investigations. President Tsai had to apologize for another faux pas, another mistake she made in recent days. She recently claimed that the building at which the Taiwan representative office in New York City, which is also responsible for relations with the UN to the extent that Taiwan can interact with UN agencies, was purchased under her watch when she was the deputy premier towards the end of the Chen Shui-bian administration around 2005, 2006. Actually, it turned out that this project occurred prior to her time as deputy premier. And when she made this statement, people who were in government at the time, they immediately pointed out, they said, no, you're actually a legislator at the time. You weren't involved in the decision to review the property, review the purchase price, or approve it. Now, it turns out once she did join the cabinet as a deputy premier, she was involved in some of the administrative things that need to be handled after the purchase was made, but she was not the leader of this project. It wasn't her decision, as she had initially indicated. And she took to her social media. She wrote on Facebook, when I make a mistake, I do apologize for it. So a great act of contrition, very humble. She said, when I'm wrong, I take responsibility for it. So it was a bad move to claim credit for something that she hadn't done, but at least very quickly, she did apologize for it. So all in all, President Tsai is having a relatively positive period. The fallout from the protests in Hong Kong might be another factor. We'll probably be talking about that in the coming weeks as protests in Hong Kong continue. But President Tsai and her government continue to utilize that issue on social media as well to distinguish what's going on in Hong Kong and, of course, the lack of freedom and human rights increasingly not just in Hong Kong, but obviously in China, and what we're trying to protect and what her government is trying to protect here in Taiwan. And again, we see her poll numbers increase. Who are they increasing over? Well, the Kuomintang candidate, Han Kuo-yu, had some bad news in recent weeks. Some of his public appearances have not gone very well. People have been questioning his grasp of public policy issues. There was a rollout of energy policy at which his team supported restarting the 4th nuclear power plant here in Taiwan, a very controversial project which has been started and stopped many times across DPP, KMT, governments, both at the central level as well as the local level in what used to be Taipei County and is now known as New Taipei City. There's been several changes in governments over the years that this project has been in flux, and we see both parties at times have seemed to take in both positions, either they're for it or they're against it at different moments in time. But Han Kuo-yu's policy team, their very first major policy announcement was about energy policy, and they supported, subject to certain parameters, and of course that would include what to do with the waste that's created from operating a nuclear power plant. We already have 3 here in Taiwan, but keeping in mind that Taiwan has to import most of its energy needs, the government's plan to use green or renewable energy is probably never going to generate enough energy to make up for the needs of commercial and residential users here in Taiwan, especially in the hot weather like we're having now in the summer where everyone is using their air cons. But of course, industry and the tech industry here, very intensive as far as its energy needs. So the Han Kuo-yu's policy team, they endorsed using nuclear power, and understandably, the DPP immediately criticized that. There are a lot of people in the public, they still struggle with, should we support this? There was a referendum last November during the local election where people seemed to generally endorse the continued use of nuclear power. So it's up to Han Kuo-yu's team to really explain that we could do this safely, and that might convince the public more. But there seemed to be a lot of criticism. Now, it could just be partisans. There were obviously DPP politicians, both elected politicians as well as in their party headquarters, who immediately held press conferences. They went to social media to criticize Han Kuo-yu and his team for proposing that. But we should keep in mind that, again, energy needs are, it's an issue without a great solution here in Taiwan because there is no local energy source. So you're going to either import it, they're going to import coal, they're going to use nuclear, or they're going to try and make up some of the balance by using renewables, which are never going to make up entirely what's needed. So nuclear is probably going to continue to be part of the mix, and that's why Han Kuo-yu's team did endorse it. They recognize that it's kind of unavoidable. Han Kuo-yu was also attacked personally on several fronts. He was attacked for playing mahjong during a holiday earlier this year when he went with his family to Bali. Is that a fair attack? Well, Han Kuo-yu certainly didn't think so. He said, oh, look, I'm on holiday. Why can't I play mahjong with my family? But of course, his political enemies will play that up, and they'll say he's not a responsible person, he's got bad habits. So it's up to Han Kuo-yu to not just to outsource this to his surrogates or his team members, but it's actually up to him to make the case that these are personal attacks. I was with my family, I was on a holiday. So he probably needs to respond stronger to that if he doesn't want to let the other side paint the image of who he is. Very similarly, there have been attacks about his resume, his education. He may not have explained clearly some of the things he did when he was in school. People said, oh, you said you had a part-time job, but you earlier said you went to school at night when he was in his student years. And then he explained, well, no, actually, I was going to school during the day, and I had a part-time job at night. So he's still struggling to hit back at some of these criticisms. And he says, of course, they're just attacking me because they don't like me. And that may be true, but he needs to really explain clearly to the public why this might even be called fake news. His side's often accused of spreading fake news, but his opponents might also be spreading fake news, but only Han Kuo-yu could clearly explain why that is the case. So he needs to do a bit better on his messaging. So we see that his poll numbers are starting to slide backwards as a result of some of these instances where his messaging isn't as strong. It is still early for him, so you could say that he's got this good news. If his policy team can come up with good policy ideas, if he could articulate it, if he could become a stronger candidate, there's still many months to go. He's not that far behind in the polls. And that brings us to the other potential presidential candidates and what kind of news developments have happened with them. There's still 3 other major potential candidates who are circling around. We don't know what their intentions are. That's Terry Guo Taiming, the former chairman of the Foxconn Honhai technology manufacturing company. He had competed for the Kuomintang nomination. He lost to Han Kuo-yu. Mayor Wen-je of Taipei City, and the former Legislative Yuan Speaker Wang Jinping. So there's been on again, off again speculation that one out of these 3 may run for president. They may cooperate in some kind of team. They've had phone calls. They've had meetings. They didn't have phone calls. They didn't have meetings. They keep circling around, as I said, and they haven't really made their intentions known. They're running out of time. A few months ago, we could have said they still have time, there's no urgency. But once we get into September, we start to get into the applicable deadlines for collecting signatures and submitting signatures and organizing a team. It's getting close. They're going to have to make a decision. So their poll numbers are falling as well. It doesn't help Han Kuo-yu either, because if Guo Taiming or Terry Guo, Wen-je, Wang Jinping are not going to run, most of those votes will probably transfer over to Han Kuo-yu, not all of them, but a lot of them. And then we would see Han Kuo-yu's numbers start to go back up. We have to keep in mind that President Tsai, she won an overwhelming victory in the 2016 election. She had about 56%. Her poll numbers now hovering in the low to mid-30s. It's good. Of course, she likes to be ahead of her opponents, but it's still not looking like she'll have the overwhelming majority that she commanded in 2016. So poll numbers definitely should be watching in the coming days and weeks, but I would say a big factor in this is ultimately going to be whether or not Guo or Wang run, and then we could reassess this and see what will the actual battle look like. I'm Ross Feingold, and you've been watching Taiwan Hashtag on the Storm Media Group.